right, let's go ahead and get started. Really excited for today's class. So as promised, today's all about content. So we're going to be going over a few different things, from some basic analysis and questions, different tips and techniques to tracking various types of content, and hopefully you guys will be able to take away a lot from this and immediately apply it to your use cases. So just some quick reminders. Unfortunately, we have another class that needs to be rescheduled. So the class, I believe, which is next Wednesday on 4/19, I need to reschedule that because I found out I'm going to be on TV. So it's not being rescheduled for no reason. But we're going to push that one probably till the following week. So we'll send an email, and I'll make sure I follow up with you all on that and in the Facebook group as well. Just logistics, if you're joining us live for the first time, don't use the Q&A feature if you have questions. Instead, use chat. Make sure you select everyone so everyone can see your questions, and people who follow along on the recordings can keep up. As always, I have plenty of time after this lecture is over for open Q&A. So if you have any of your own use cases that I didn't cover, or you want to go over any of the material in the past lecture, or just have a random Google Analytics question, definitely bring that up at the end, and we'll cover that. Definitely keep up on the Facebook group. Lots of great discussions on there. And as always, your questions and feedback is appreciated. So for today, just a little bit about the agenda. So we're going to go over some of the fundamentals around content tracking. We'll start off with some heavy focus around blogs, since that's a very obvious type of content that is applicable to almost everyone. We'll go over an example of a site, walk you through kind of what basic implementation looks like, what the limitations of that are, and then what you guys should really be striving to do with a blog. We'll talk about measuring all sorts of interactions within content. We'll do some reporting and analysis. I'm going to put it together with some quantitative and qualitative aspects today. So we'll also touch a little bit on Google surveys, as well as Google Optimize, which are really important for content as well. And then as always, we'll try and put it all together at the end. As always, there's a demo account, which I try to use as much as possible. Click the link or just search Google Analytics demo account if you don't have it. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So what we're gonna do today to start off our lecture is we're gonna start off with a blog. And I'm gonna walk you through kind of what I look at when I'm trying to measure how well a certain business is at being able to understand their users, as well as a little sneak peek of a preview of a lecture we're going to do in the coming week around audits and data integrity. So one of my favorite brands is Burton. I've been buying their gear for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. I'm a huge snowboard fan, been an instructor forever, so love snowboarding. And with Burton, you can see that this is a retail site, so it's got e-commerce where we can go in and buy, but it's also got a blog where they like to post updates, content, and try and engage with their community. So let's take a look at our blog. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Google Analytics Debugger, which is a free Chrome extension. So even though I don't have access to Burton's data, I still have the ability to see what they're tracking. And that's simply by looking at the network requests that are coming out of my browsers to Google Analytics. So when we get to the blog, we can see that they're firing a page view. And then they're also firing an event called Viewed Blog Index Burton Blogs, the Burton blog. So just a side note, this is actually really bad, the way they've done this. This event is fired automatically on page load. And we can see that this interactive event, if you remember our events lecture, is set to 0, which means it's set to inactive or false, meaning that the bounce rate for anyone landing on this page is 0, as well as that event updated the time. And since these events fire basically at the same time, the time on page which is recorded is also 0. So remember, if you're doing anything with events and those fire automatically on page load, make sure you set the non-interaction flag to true or 1, which will not affect the bounce rate or the time being recorded. So right away, that's kind of a finding we find right here. But let's go a little bit deeper. So what Burton's going to care about most is interactivity with the content And ultimately what they should be striving to do or to understand it is, how is this content influencing people going in and buying products, right? Especially if they're promoting anything within the post about a product, what with that post is actually leading to an outcome on the site of actually acquiring that product. So let's take a look at a post right here. So on turn with a Burton bag collection. So we'll load up this page and we'll wait for the network requests. And we can see here again is the page view, which is the first event. So hit type is page view with the URL. And then we scroll down and there's that event indicating that this blog post was viewed, which is not needed. And then let's go ahead and clear our console. So let's start to pretend we're a user right now and we're going to interact with this content. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start scrolling to read this page. This stuff down here is a widget. It's Discus. It's not actually going to their main GA account. It's something else that's using Google Analytics. So ignore that. But we're reading the post. We're scrolling. Nice pictures. He's having a lot of fun. We keep scrolling. Keep reading. Get to the bottom. Here's a carousel. Maybe I'll play with this carousel. And then maybe I'll close this tab. So what just happened, if you look at this console, there's a bunch of nonsense here, but there was no additional interactions that was sent to Google Analytics. The scrolling wasn't tracked. The carousel clicks wasn't tracked, which means if I was a user and I landed on this page, remember from our previous lecture about events, that the time associated with this page is 0, and the bounce rate for this page would be 100%. So in Google Analytics, Burton, the way this page looks from a performance standpoint is that this page is very low performance, that no one's interacting with it, everyone's simply coming and leaving, which isn't necessarily right. So the things we should be seeing on this, if we care about content and analyzing it, is first and foremost, scroll tracking. So I would have expected to be able to see some sort of scroll tracking on this page. And there's a few different ways of doing it. And depending on your CMS, your developers, or the plugin you're using, will depend on the approach you choose. The most common approach for scroll tracking is it's very easy to add a tag in Google Tag Manager. And I'll show you the link in a second. But it's very easy to add a tag and track milestones, 25, 50, 75, and 100%. And when we fire those events, we'll be able to actually track how far into a page are our users getting. And that can help us understand, is our content too long? Is it too short? Is it not resonating with our users, etc. Now, that's the most common way. If you have the ability to customize or use a better plugin, my preference is actually to use it by milestones on the page itself. So for example, you can start with started scrolling, and then you can start, for example, at the content, like at the head of the content, the middle of the content, and then at the bottom of a content. So for example, when they reach the end of a post, I like when it fires that they finished reading the article. The reason the percentages aren't my favorite is because usually with most sites, there's a lot of content at the bottom after the article's finished. And you can tell with a heat map pretty easily that very few of your users are ever going to go past the end of the article into the content section or anything else. So that's just some examples with this blog on the Burton site, which is one of my favorite brands, of what they should be doing to measure engagement. So let's go back to the slide for a second. So we'll share these slides after. And instead of boring you with hours of Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager code, what I've done is I've included links to articles. So for example, if we went to this link about scroll tracking, I've already gone ahead and linked you to kind of the most common articles about how to implement each of these different types of tracking with Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. So Lunametrics has a great article on how you guys can do scroll tracking with this recipe with Google Tag Manager. So if you have Google Tag Manager on your site and you have edit and publish access, you can go in and you can publish this probably in 10 to 15 minutes, and then you'll have scroll tracking throughout your site. So Amanda had a question. Can you give some examples on how you use scroll tracking to solve problems or make better marketing decisions? So with scroll tracking, what I can do is, I believe the Google Analytics demo account has it enabled. So let me close this segment. So if we go into the acquisition, or if we go into the behavior section, we go into events and we go into top events. Pretty much all of those interactions with your content should be coming in the form of an event. It's what makes the most sense. So here's the scroll depth event that the Google Merchandise Store implemented. So when we click on this, it should tell us the percentage that was scrolled. So my preference is not to do it like the way Google did. Instead of having an event action of percentage, which I think is wasted, and you would just have the percentage as the action. So 0, 25, 50, 100. And then I like to use the label for the page, but Google decided they would do the label as the percentage. So when we want to actually figure out what percentage of a particular page was scrolled, we actually need to use a secondary dimension. So let me go ahead and add the page. So an example, Amanda, of what I would use this for, if you just pretended we are looking at a particular article, what we can do with this is begin to understand our audience, right? And actually what happens with engagement. So we have a lot of authors on our blogs, and we always have an internal debate, right? Should we have more technical or long form content, or we should have more teasers that link to something more in depth? So right here, this is how you would identify a particular page and begin to understand how far in that page your users are actually getting. So we can see that of everyone that landed on, for example, on this YouTube page, if we get down here, we lost roughly 25% right at the 25% mark. And then when we get to the 75% mark, we had about 50% that actually came in and got that far. So one of the easiest ways to use this is just to understand how far into a post are people actually reading, which helps you understand what sort of content or targets should you be trying for a particular audience you care about. The other thing you could do with this, as an example, is if you're doing any sort of remarketing off of your blog, you can begin to build audiences based off that engagement instead of a generic audience, right? So you can build an audience of readers or engaged readers and then use that for targeting. So that's another common use case I've seen. But you can also use this engaged audience to really understand their performance on converting or doing certain outcomes, right? So what is the likelihood of someone, for example, submitting a form submission or signing up for a free trial or downloading a particular resource if they read 50% of a post versus less than 50% of a post? Does it make a difference or does it really not? So those are just some of the ideas you can do there. Now going back to this slide here, I've also got stuff for video. So there's plugins for YouTube, Vimeo, pretty much any video player on the market you can easily track. Carousels, like the one we looked at Burton, are a bit more tricky. You probably have to have a developer or need to know a little bit more about Google Tag Manager to do that. There's no real plug-and-play solution for carousels. But for downloads, outbound links, and on-site searches, there's definitely easy ways to accomplish that. So I definitely would want to see for each of your sites that you have all your downloads, your outbound links, your videos, you have scroll tracking, you have search configured, and all of that will give us a good representative set of data to understand what our users are doing. So just a little bit about search. So I like to talk about search quite a bit. So actually, I'll come back to search in a minute. So let me just sneak ahead real quick. Okay, so for search, if we go back to the Burton site, when I'm doing my audits, about 50% of the time when I'm going in, site search hasn't been set up for a lot of the clients that I work with. And it's really unfortunate because the site search is one of the most easy ways to capture information about your users. So I also included an article there on how to set it up. But all you need to do to set up site search is you'll go into your admin section of Google Analytics, and you'll grab this query parameter. So if we go into the admin, let me switch to my GA view with admin. So if we go into the admin section, in the view settings, you can set up site search in 30 seconds. You'll simply scroll down, you'll enable site search, and you'll plug in your query parameter. I like to strip them out as well, and then you'll save. And then what ends up happening is in here, you get a really valuable set of data. So if we go into the search terms, you're going to start capturing exactly what your users are looking for. So this is one of the few qualitative pieces of data we get in GA. And this is where your users are explicitly telling you what they're looking for. So we'll come back to this in a little bit. If your website, when you're doing a search on it, doesn't have a query parameter, this article here also includes instructions for how to set up site search for no query parameter setups as well. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is a little bit about the metadata from the content itself. So the other types of things that I wasn't seeing on Burton's site was any metadata about the content itself. So it's really important for me when I'm trying to get my customers to write more content or understand the importance to really be able to understand what content's resonating and also make it more collaborative and even competitive. And I'll explain what that means in a second. But the things that I wanted to see on Burton's site was I wanted to see an author, I wanted to see some semblance of a page category, and also the publish date. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. So for the author, if we go back, so if we go, for example, to our blog, pretty much any WordPress or any blog will have an author that's easily initted here. So this particular page was written by Jeff Pierce. And the reason we want to capture the author in Google Analytics is this is a great way for you to easily create reports that you can then distribute to the authors themselves to understand how their content's performing, right? What some of my clients try to do, and it never works, is they just give the author access to Google Analytics or maybe a filtered view in Google Analytics, but it ends up being either overwhelming, it's too much data, or they're not a Google Analytics expert, so they're never going to log in and use it anyways. So if we actually have the author as a dimension, it's very easy to actually come in here and create either a dashboard or a data studio report, which I'll show in a little bit, but a specific report for that particular author. And one thing I like to do, and a lot of my clients do as well, is they'll actually create a lobby dashboard and either have it in real time or kind of a monthly or week over week view into who their top authors are, who have the top article in a year. And that way it becomes more competitive and people want to write more because they want to have the most trafficked article or the article that's generating the most amount of leads, as an example. So the author is something that's pretty important to set up. So I included a link here on what you need to do that. The easiest way, if your blog's on WordPress, which I'm guessing most of yours are, what's really great is if you're using the plugin. So my favorite WordPress plugin is the Duracell Google Tag Manager plugin. So it's a free plugin for WordPress. And if we go to my website and look at a blog post, so we'll look, for example, at my attribution post. This plugin, this Duracell Google Tag Manager plugin, makes tracking all that metadata about your content so easy. So if we just go look at my post about the course, we can open up our console. That was the wrong button. And if we just type in data layer into our console, I'll show you the object. Computer slow, sorry. So there's GTM start, and then here's the object of all the data this plugin made for me without me having to do any development. So we can see that the author, the post date, the page type, the page title, even the weather. There's even a weather plugin that's part of this as well. But using this plugin, you can get the 3 recommendations I had. It'll automatically create a category, it'll automatically create the author, and it will automatically post the publish date as well. Now going back to the slides, the reason I like to have the publish date as part of my structured metadata is then it's really easy for you to go in and create a report around kind of the life cycle of your content, right? So what's the average, for example, rate of when no one looks at your article anymore? So what's the drop off on day 1, day 2, day 3? Or a lot of my clients want a list of articles that are most popular within a certain month, not necessarily that are viewed in the month, but were actually published in that month. Because as you write more and more content, and as Google starts to rank and actually show that organically, oftentimes what will happen is you'll always have old posts, which will always rank really high. But if you want to just focus on new content that you're writing, having that publish date will allow you to really easily go in and set that up as well. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit now was content categorization. And this is one of the most important parts, I think, of really understanding and cohorting your content together. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to set this up. So if we go into Google Analytics, so I'm going to switch back to the view that I have admin in. Let me zoom out a little bit. So I'll switch my view. Or switch my org. So there's a few different ways to set up content grouping in Google Analytics. So the first way, once I switch my view, is going to be in the admin section. And the admin section is where you're actually going to set up all 3. And I'll go through the 3 different types or approaches we have for content grouping. So right now I'm in my blog, so Charles Farina, where I have admin access. And inside of the admin on the right-hand side, so we'll click admin. And underneath the view settings, so that's where these content groups are set up, is at the view level. We have 5 slots for tracking different groups of content. So if you're, for example, an e-commerce site, you might want to group your content or your products by males versus females, or maybe by product line. So maybe shirts versus accessories versus bags. Or if you're writing about blog or you have content, so for example, maybe I want to group my blog post by Google Tag Manager versus Google Analytics. Or if you have different content for different audiences, maybe you're a B2B, maybe you want to group that content by the audience, right? Is it for retailers? Is it for finance? So out of the box, Google Analytics gives you 5 slots for setting up different definitions around content groups. And there's 3 ways that we can go in and we can set up our groups of content. The first is by actually defining it as part of your tracking code, which is going to be the most complex way of doing it. And this is where your site or your developers are actually going to pass Google Tag Manager what category that page belongs. It's the most robust way of doing it, but as I mentioned, it usually depends on either having a developer, or this is where maybe on the page, somewhere in the source code, there's already somewhere, for example, in a meta tag where that content exists. And if that's the case, CMO comes to the rescue. There's a great article that you can look at here for easily going into Google Tag Manager, grabbing that category from the page, and then passing it in here. But the 2 other most common ways is either extraction or rule definitions. And both of these you can set up in the interface itself. So what extraction does is if the content and the categorization follows a defined part of your URL. So in this example, you can see it's accessories, and then there's this .star with a question mark. What this is going to do is if we actually do this, so we were to do accessories, and then do our .star afterwards, is it's going to take anything with the accessories URL, and it's going to grab anything that follows after, and it's going to call it accessories. So it's automatically going to pull out everything from accessories and then define that group by what's next in your URL. And then the way you would do this is you would then do it for each group you wanted to define here. So the extraction is simply taking part of the defined URL structure, and it follows something in the URL, grabs another part of the URL, and then automatically puts that into a content group. So this is one approach. So if you have really nicely defined URLs, this is an easy way to do it. But the more common way, or the more likely way that you're going to go in and set up your content groups is by using these rule definitions. And these are much more flexible. So using the rule definitions, we have the ability to either use the page title or screen names. And doing this, you can grab anything. So for example, I could say any page that contains the word video, let's call this video. And then I can define a new rule, and I can, for example, say anything that contains B2B, we'll define this as B2B. So you can see this is pretty easy to go in and configure, but you simply define which URLs, either using regex or the contains. And then the way this works is your page will match the first category in the list. So if I'm setting up content grouping using rule definitions, what I always do is I'll set up an other category, and I'll say, for example, page matches regex .star, which is anything in regular expression, and I'll drag this to the bottom. So if I save this content group, it would first look for B2B, and it would pull out all the pages that match that and assign it to B2B. Then it looks for video, and then anything that's left over, it'll group as this generic other bucket. So if I had a URL that was like B2B-video, it only matches once. So since B2B is first, it would take that page. It would not get assigned a video. And that's the way this rule definitions works. It's the first in gets assigned, and then it evaluates to the rest of the rules after. But this is really easy to set up. So let's go back to our demo account, and let's take a look at where we can find these content groups and how to use them once they're set up. So if I go back to the all pages report, this is the default way we look at content in GA, is simply by the URLs. But once you set up your content groups, they'll appear right here, and you simply click the dropdown and select which content group you're looking at grabbing. So here's a brands content group. Let's see if there's anything in here. So here's Google, YouTube, and not set. And then we can see some of the other definitions. So here's product categories. So now we have our apparel, brands, bags, electronics, office, drinkware, lifestyle. And if we drill into the product category, it's going to show us all of the content that was associated with that particular category. So here are all the pages that were in, if we look at the breadcrumb, the apparel section. So this is a really easy way for you to go in and actually now start to trend and evaluate your groups of content from a performance standpoint. So now that I have these set up, I can easily go in, I can plot these on my graph, and I can see how I'm trending or doing over time. In addition, the other benefit of having these is now these content categories are available in any report in GA. So you can easily go in and you can add these content groups anywhere. So those will all be available for custom reports, dashboards, in our audiences. So for example, if I wanted to create a remarketing audience for anyone who looked at electronics, now it's very easy to do since I've defined it as part of my schema in GA. So content categorization is really important. It's a much better way, I think, of grouping content than trying to do it manually by using the search to roll up your URLs. So pretty important to do. All right, so a little bit about some common issues I see with tracking content. And we're gonna get into some questions and exercises in a second, but I can't tell you how many times I go to a website and a customer contacts me because they're trying to understand the performance of their content or how their site's performing. And the first thing I do is I open up my debugger and I start looking at Google Analytics. And I'll find, for example, that the different owners of the site set up different Google Analytics accounts. So for example, on the Burton site, this part of the site will go to UA-123-1. And then when they set up the blog, they set up a new Google Analytics account, and that'll go to UA-999-2, a completely separate part. And that's really bad because those sets of data, when you set them up as different Google Analytics accounts, are siloed. And there's no way to track a user from the e-commerce site to the blog or from the blog to the e-commerce site. So we have no real way of understanding the true impact that site is having on outcomes. So it's really important that if you're looking at your own site or any of your clients, that you should see everything tracked together holistically in one property and one view, so you have the ability to create the audiences and see cross-site performance and measure the pathing and engagement from there. The other thing that's a little bit less common, but I still see all the time, is if your blog is hosted on a different domain name. So for example, if it was burtonblog.com, you need to set up cross-domain tracking, even if you have the same Google Analytics ID on both sites. So you can tell if you have cross-domain tracking set up by clicking on a link from the main site to the other site, and you should see some ugly parameter such as $GA equals some random string of numbers. It's actually numbers, not letters. And this string of numbers is actually the cookie. It's the client ID from the cookie of the first site. And if you're not seeing those IDs in that parameter, it means that session and that user is not tracked as one user or one visit, and instead it's broken out into 2 visits and 2 users. So make sure for your blog, everything's tracked in one property. And if you have a cross-domain setup, make sure you're seeing this parameter, and we'll cover that in a later lecture if it's something you don't have. Okay, so now that we've spent the first part of this lecture talking about how do we set up various types of content, and again, I included all the links for everything you need on how to do this. So I encourage you to try after this lecture to implement it or work with your developer, and then you can contact us in the Facebook group if you need any additional help, and I'll be sure to help you. But once we assume, or you've actually set everything up, we can start to answer some really important questions. So this is one that I'm asked all the time, and people think Google Analytics can't answer this question of understanding content performance, right? So as a simple question, how do we know how many conversions the blog drove or is associated for? So how many people viewed a particular page and then went on to purchase or convert or fill out a lead? So I'll show you how to answer that with Google Analytics. So we'll go back to our demo account, which is somewhere. So again, now we're back in the Google Merchandise Store. And let's say we wanted to figure out a particular page. So here is a spring sale on the Google Merchandise Store. So if we wanted to understand how many people viewed this particular page and then went on to convert, what we need to do is we need to build an audience. Remember that with the pages report, there's no revenue or goals that are available. And that's because pages don't convert, users and visits convert, but a page doesn't convert because there's many pages involved in a conversion. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. So in order to actually get at the conversions, what we need to do is use our audiences. So a common mistake that I see when people are trying to analyze content performance is they'll go in and they'll create an audience like this. So they'll go into conditions, they'll go in and define the page. So they'll say, let's look at anyone where page contains our spring sale and transactions per session is greater than 0. So let's see how well everyone's following along. So if I'm trying to understand how that spring sale page drove conversions, what's wrong with the segment and that it's not actually telling us? Let's see if anyone can get it. Is this telling me that this many people, which on the right-hand side, 588 users, viewed spring sale and then purchased? So a few different ideas. Now the issue here is there's no order associated with these two actions because we've used it in the conditions section, which means that they could either purchase and then view the page or view this page and then convert. So if you're trying to establish an order where these actions occur, it's really important that you remember to build these in the sequences section. This is where order is defined. So this is where we would go and say, step 1 is page contains spring sale. And then we'd add a step and say it is followed by transactions per session is greater than 0. And this should give us a different number than the first audience. So 588 people viewed that spring sale and then purchased. And a few of you had a very good comments as well. It'd probably be much better to change the scope of this from sessions to users. With sessions, I'm simply isolating the visits where both of these occurred. But if I change this to users, now I'm looking at anyone who viewed spring sale and then converted between March 11th and April 9th. And you can see I have many more users now. I have 836, which is up from 550. So this is how, when we're trying to understand content and understanding how many people viewed a content and then later took an action, of the way we would do this. So if we were trying to understand a blog, usually you can do something simple like define page contains /blog, and then transactions or goals or whatever is followed as per session. Per user is greater than whatever action is occurring. So another question, does that step 1 is immediately followed by step 2? So remember that is followed by means any number of things can happen in between. So it's not the immediate next thing, meaning they didn't go to the blog and then they purchased. It's they viewed the blog and then at some point later they purchased. There is an option to change it to is immediately followed by, but you are rarely, if ever, going to use this because it actually literally means the next hit, and no one is ever looking for the next hit is this. So you're always going to pretty much use this followed by. Okay, so now that you know how to do that, let's go to the next question. So another question that I really like to do, and if you attended our webinar, hopefully you remember this one, but how can we identify underperforming pages, right? So with content is something where we should always be striving to make better content or new content that resonates with our users. So when we're trying to look at pages, one of the exercises I like to do is challenge my clients during their training to come up with 5 pages on their site that they think need the most attention. Or if their boss asked them for what page should we do some tests on next week, and they needed that by the end of the day, what would they do in Google Analytics to identify those pages? So my favorite way of doing that is, let me get rid of my segment. So if I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to optimize, one of the biggest opportunities is landing pages. So the landing page, remember, is the first page of a visit or a session. And if we use bounce rate as an idea or at least a proxy of performance, and remember, if you're tracking meaningful engagement with interactive events, your bounce rate should tell you what percentage of your audience is actually taking a meaningful action versus what percentage is taking no action whatsoever. So if you're tracking those videos, those carousels, maybe at 50% of a scroll, you make that interactive, your bounce rate will be reflective of who's actually doing something meaningful versus who's not. By default, it's not necessarily that great, but once you guys implement all those events, you'll have a great use of using bounce rate for this. So if I wanted to identify the 5 worst pages, most people would just sort by bounce rate. And when we do this sort, you can see the problem is each of these, either 0 or 100%, have basically no sessions or users associated with them. So it's not a good way of using the sort. So instead, you can use this comparison feature. And this is one of the hidden features of GA. So using this comparison feature above the table, what we can do is we can select bounce rate. And I'm asked all the time, what's a good bounce rate? And there is no good bounce rate. Instead, it's what's your bounce rate and how is your content benchmarked versus your definition of a bounce rate. And this comparison feature does exactly that. It allows us to take our average bounce rate, which is 48%, and compare each page versus that to identify what content is over or underperforming versus that. And better yet, what we can do with this is we can go in and we can identify groups of pages. So for example, if I was trying to optimize the bags section of my site, I can search for bags, and now it's showing us the bounce rate for the bags, which is 53%. And I can see each page versus that benchmark. So obviously, this Google Zipper front sports bag, with it performing 76% worse, is probably going to get the most amount of attention. So using this comparison feature on your own content or parts of your content, you can easily use this as an opportunity to find pages and try and improve the performance of that. And you can go deeper by using secondary dimensions. You can filter it for a particular traffic source. So maybe you only want to look at organic or paid, and then do your optimization that way. But that is an easy way you can use to identify underperforming pages. Another content question: how can Google Analytics help you with content ideas? What content is your audience looking for, or should you be writing or thinking about? It's kind of a tough question. But if you've got the right tracking, it's actually a pretty easy question to answer. So this all comes down to site search. And I like to use this to answer this question. So this site search box is one of the few places, again, where we get qualitative data. So if I'm searching for the word hippo on the Burton site, I've now told Burton that I'm looking for hippo. And here's the 2 products that are returned for that. Now, when you're looking for more generic, right, when your users are looking for different types of things, what ends up happening is if you configured site search, all of those keywords that they're looking for are going to be in our search terms report. So I've seen this time and time again. I highly recommend that if you've set up your site search tracking, that you spend at least 10, 15 minutes every month looking through this to find keywords that are net new or you weren't expecting, right? So a few different ways to use this for content ideas or performance, right? The first metric we have in here is search exits. Search exits is telling us what percentage of our traffic searched for a keyword and then left after, right? Which means that they didn't click on any content and instead they chose to leave your site. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to look for keywords that have a high percentage of search exits. And then I'm going to go back on the site. I'm going to search for that keyword and try and understand why are they leaving and what about that page isn't resonating with that particular audience. And then we also have search refinements, right? So if you're seeing a certain keyword with a high percentage of search refinements, you might need to modify your site search to display a different page because they're actually looking for something else. And it's an opportunity to go in and either create a different page or optimize your site search to look for that. So one of the things I'll do with this is we can use, for example, our date range comparison. So if I were to just compare my date range, I can then look for which keywords are trafficked month over month that I didn't see before. And I've seen this over and over again where my clients will find keywords that they didn't think anyone was looking for because they're net new. They're new to the industry. They're a new use case. And then when they see those keywords being searched, they go and have their content team write content around that. And then they end up being first to market with the content for that particular audience. And that ends up generating business. So you can easily go in and mine your content reports to find various keywords and content ideas that you need. So a question from Patrick, does the ability to track site search within GA depend on using GA's internal search engine? It's not dependent on Google's site search appliance at all. Instead, it's simply dependent on you going in and configuring it. So I've got a link on the slide to the site search setup. All you need to do is define the query parameter. So we'd go into the admin section of GA and define the queue as the site search, and it'll automatically put the hippo into the search term report. So pretty easy to set up. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Now, the other thing that I would recommend that you guys set up, which isn't out of the box in Google Analytics. So let's say I was looking for a keyword that doesn't exist. So I'll just type some gibberish because I'm not creative right now. So here, the way this is going to work in Google Analytics is it's going to capture this keyword on this URL. But what it's not going to do is tell us which keywords aren't actually generating results, right? So this is a really important question that you should be able to answer. What keywords are my users searching for where I don't have anything showing for those particular results? So again, SEMO to the rescue. Somewhere in here, I think it's actually my next slide. This URL, you guys can view after. You can set this up in 5 minutes with Google Tag Manager and easily grab the metadata from this page to set up an event in Google Analytics, which will create a report to tell you which keywords are resulting in no results. And again, this is an easy way to go in and optimize your site, find content ideas, and improve the experience for your users. So this is something else that's pretty valuable to set up from a content perspective. All right. So what I wanted to do with the last 10 to 20 minutes is talk a little bit about other types of content, which is really important. So the first thing I wanted to talk for a second about is more about the qualitative data. So when we're trying to understand content performance or user experience, there's nowhere in Google Analytics where it's an easy way for your users to tell you how their experience was, right? We just have a bunch of quantitative reports. So what Google did is they recently added a surveys product as part of their suite. So the reason why this is important for this lecture is most people don't realize that as part of Google surveys, there's actually a free survey that you can set up and deploy on your website. And I can show you exactly what that looks like on mine. So let me actually go to my other Chrome window. So as part of Google Surveys is really designed for qualitative off-site research, right? It's where you can reach users on Google's ad networks, so AdWords and their content network, to survey them. So for example, are you in market to buy a camera? And then ask them a bunch of questions about what they're interested in. But what you can also do with this is you can set up a website survey for free. And this is the website satisfaction survey that I just paused. I've been running it for a few months. And when we launched our new website, I was able to deploy this survey for free and ask these questions. So overall, how satisfied are you with our website? What did you find frustrating about it? Why did you visit? And then did you successfully complete your reason for visiting? And within the survey, you can go in and you can actually get all the data about the responses. So I don't have a lot of traffic for this particular survey, but we can go in and we can actually see all the responses scored. So this is the very dissatisfied, satisfied, somewhat. If we scroll down, we can see various data about them. We can scroll through the questions. What, if anything, did you find appealing or unappealing about our users? So here's the actual answers. Nothing. Up-to-date information and solutions. What is your main reason for visiting? Blog, interested, looking for GA consultants. So you get all of this information here. And if we go to the table, we'll also get all of the ability to segment by age, gender, all sorts of other things. The reason why this is important is you're not able, at least not yet, to watch, or there's no easy way for your users to communicate when they're frustrated. So this is a really easy way to find things that you never knew were happening. So for example, maybe your users are having problems submitting your contact form, or maybe the video is not working, or maybe there's a use case that your website doesn't have. So with these free Google surveys, it's a really easy opportunity for you for either a long time or even just a few weeks to collect some qualitative data for users to tell you different things about your site. So the question was how does it look on the site? So I can show you that as well. So it's going to be that annoying survey that you guys have seen a million times when you visit a site, but it's going to be a small pop-up on the right-hand corner. So if we go to the example surveys, I don't think this one has, or actually, hold on. If I go to website surveys, I think I can preview it in here. So this is exactly what it's going to look like. So on the bottom right-hand corner, it's going to just have this prompt. So how satisfied are you? Very satisfied. I hate surveys. You'll inevitably get a few of these. And it's pretty easy to close. So if you're using Google Tag Manager, there's a Google Surveys tag. So it took me 5 minutes to add Google Surveys and deploy it on my website. And you also have the ability to control when your users see it. So it's probably not a good idea to show a survey on the first page view of a user because they haven't actually gone through your site yet. So you can easily target the survey to their third page view or any of the other targeting options with Google Tag Manager. So for example, if you only wanted to survey blogs or only wanted to survey the contact page on your website, you can easily change the tag to only fire on that particular section. So Google Surveys is free, really easy to use, and the report is only available in here. So right now it doesn't really connect with Google Analytics. It's just a separate set of qualitative data. The other product I wanted to show you guys really quickly, we don't have a lecture dedicated to this, but 2 weeks ago, Google launched Optimize, which is their free A/B and multivariate testing platform. So right now what Google has done is they've created a free tool that everyone in this lecture can go in and immediately start to use to test content ideas to drive better performance and better experiences for your users, right? So it's so easy for you now to test your call to actions and test the text and your headlines and test different experiences, right? So how does a page perform when you add a video versus when there's no video? So to show you an example of this, I'll show you guys how easy it is to go in and create an experiment. So what we'll do is we'll create a new experiment. We'll call this our main nav change. And we can pick any website. So as an example, I can just grab Burton, even though Burton doesn't have optimized yet. And you can easily launch A/B multivariate or redirect tests. And then the beauty of this tool is a lot of people in marketing or with analytics backgrounds don't necessarily have a lot of HTML or JavaScript or any ability to code. So Optimize was built with two different audiences in mind. One, marketers who don't know how to code, and two, developers who do, so that they can work nicely together. So to create an experiment, it's as simple as creating a variant, launching the editor. So Optimize includes a free visual editor. It's a Chrome extension, which allows you, even if you don't have the optimized snippet installed on your website yet, you can still create a test preview and get ready for actually testing once the code's actually added. So what it's going to do now is it's going to load up the Burton site. It's going to inject the visual editor. And now we can start to change the experience for our users. Just give it one more second to load. Hotel Wi-Fi is not keeping up. So here's the visual editor. So it's really easy, for example, to go in and I can drag my elements around. So for example, if I wanted to drag team and switch that with sustainability, I just switched my main navigation by simply dragging it. Or for example, if I wanted to test my call to action, I can go in and I can edit the text and I can say, save up to 40% on just bags. Now I can split test this versus the original offer and see what's getting more engagement, right? Or we could just talk about all day long and just pick one, but now you can actually put data behind it to see what's resonating. So with this, you can easily go in and using this visual editor, we can edit text, we can change colors, sizes, all of this from this kind of GUI and WYSIWYG. If you are a developer or you do know how to code, you also have easy access to inject HTML, run JavaScript directly from this editor as well to do much more complex changes. So it's extremely easy to go in and change the experience for your users. And then Optimize is going to do all the split testing for you. So this product actually links with Google Analytics by default. You have to have Google Analytics to use it. And it's a very powerful integration because it's going to make it extremely easy for you to do testing. So for example, it's just grabbing a goal from Google Analytics. So if we wanted to, for example, read a blog post, it's as simple as selecting your goal. You can add secondary objectives as well. And then we have the ability to target, and we can easily do URLs, countries, new versus returning, any of those steps that we want in here. And that's how easy it is to create an experiment and Optimize to test different content ideas. So this is a really important part of Google Analytics because now we're not limited to just reporting on data, right? But we have an easy way with content to take action with insights that we find about or questions we have. So if I identify 5 pages which are performing pretty poorly on my site, with Optimize now, I have the ability myself to go in and try and find ways to improve that. And I can easily go in, for example, and do that same sort of audience, right? So I can, for example, test this just for organic traffic or paid traffic, and then test a different experience and see what performs better for that audience. And again, all of this is linked to Google Analytics. So you'll have reports in Optimize, and all of the experiments will also be available back over in the experiment section underneath behavior and GA. So Optimize, definitely encourage you guys to try it out. It costs you nothing, super easy to use. So if you're getting started with that, definitely let me know if you guys have any questions. The last part around content I wanted to end with was about heat maps and session replays. So you might have seen or experienced the in-page analytics reports that Google Analytics used to have. Probably in the past 6 months, they've actually removed them from the nav bar, and you actually have to have a Google Analytics extension to use the built-in in-page analytics. And in-page analytics is important because what it does is it gives us a nice visual representation of where users are clicking on the page or what they're scrolling visually. I hate the Google Analytics in-page analytics, and I would never recommend you use it because they just don't work. So I love Google Analytics, but that is one of the places where Google Analytics just doesn't work well. So if you're looking to do heat maps or in-page analytics, which are great for kind of UX and UI, what I would recommend you guys use instead, first there's Crazy Egg. Crazy Egg is crazy cheap. I think it costs about $10 a month for their starter plan. And I think this still works, but if you go ahead and try and cancel your trial, they should give you 50% off. So definitely recommend you go through and cancel your trial and enjoy your discount. So Crazy Egg, if we kind of scroll down, is it's going to give you, so let's just try this. It's going to give you, I'm not going to bother. It's going to give you just visual heat maps in easy ways. The other tool that you guys could try using is Hotjar. Hotjar seems to be a very popular addition. It also does a lot of other things. So you can see their kind of click map here. But probably my favorite is SessionCam. So if any of you are at the Conversion XL conference, you probably saw them. So SessionCam does two things, which I really love. One is they have the heat maps, and the other is they have the in-page analytics as well. So if I go ahead and I log into SessionCam, we're going to have some heat maps in here. But also what I like about SessionCam is it actually generates recordings for you to watch what your users are doing. So for example, if we were to view a particular recording, I can actually go in and play a session and follow my users as they use my site. And I set this up last week, again, with Google Tag Manager. It took me about 5 minutes. And I found things that were broken on my site that I never knew had occurred before. There were blog pages when we migrated our CMS that somehow all of the images got removed and everything was misaligned, and I had no idea. But right now what we're doing is we're actually watching a user, and with SessionCam, I'm using their free demo, and you can easily follow along the user as they interact. So somehow they found that link. Now they're looking at our clients. But I definitely recommend you set this up in kind of high impact parts of your site. So for example, if you're B2B, you'll want this on your forms, any of your content, and you can follow and see where your users are going, when they leave, and why. So this user just wanted to see our client list. Once they saw our client list, they left. So super easy. So those are some of the other things outside of Google Analytics that you're really going to want to have, or at least have some visibility into. Heat maps are always asked for. And then session replays are another great way to get qualitative data. And it's not something Google Analytics has, but SessionCam integrates with Google Analytics. And you can use that, for example, to build an audience of users who, for example, carted a product but didn't buy it. And you can go into SessionCam and easily watch those exact users. So pretty powerful integration there. Another thing I wanted to kind of talk about just real quickly was B2B. So B2B has use cases kind of across all verticals. I have a blog post here. Definitely recommend taking a look at this if you're in the B2B space, or if forms are really important to you. So in this blog post that I wrote about a year ago, I go over all of the sort of content analytics that you should have as a B2B user. So for example, form tracking. So it's very common when I'm looking at Google Analytics that either form tracking doesn't exist or it's really basic, meaning that usually the most sophisticated analytics that I see is when they're tracking form submissions. Now, if forms are important for your business, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have much more data about your forms. So for example, how many times are they submitted unsuccessfully meaning they failed validation, right? So unless you're tracking failed submissions, you're going to have no idea or insights into why that's happening. And it's really important because you can get insights into whether you're asking for too much information in those forms, not enough, or what are the most common reasons those forms are actually failing. So in this post, I go through details of what I would expect so you can actually measure successful and trend that. Easy ways for you to capture additional data about your users for cohorts. So for example, if you have a form and in that form, they're submitting their company name or their job title, using this, and again, I have links to Simo and Luna, you can easily track within a form which fields are being filled out. So you can actually create form funnels, right? How many people started to enter something in first name, last name, and eventually got through company, and visualize the completion and abandonment within the form itself. You can track the information of the form. So here's the form field values that I can then use for cohorting my audience. If you're B2B, Demandbase or Insight Terra or Marketo have plugins to actually do lookups. So you can actually tell what companies are visiting your website, which is another great use case. And then here's a bunch of additional stuff on content tracking. So those are already in my slides, but you can see that here. So here's an example in GA once you set up video where you can easily go in and get insights. So for example, in this, our B2B marketing intro, 42% watched more than 40%. But for our finance and insurance tutorial, 94% watched more than 40. So something about my B2B marketing, everyone's leaving in the first half of that video, but our finance and insurance video is much more engaging. So I want to figure out what's different about those two videos. And then there's a great article down here as well to integrate your CRM. So if you're using HubSpot or Insightly or Salesforce, you can also do integrations so you can query your users and understand everything about them, or even pass their Salesforce lead status back into GA. So I'll make sure you guys have this blog post, but this kind of takes content and the B2B use cases to its full extent, which is really great. So I'm going to save the author on content reports to our next lecture about Data Studio. So I believe our next lecture is going to be next Monday. So on that, we'll talk about how to actually create those particular reports. So I think that's it for today. So what questions do you guys have? What didn't we cover? Any other use cases around content you wanted me to go deeper in, or anything else? So let me pull up the chat and see what you guys have. So David asked, for survey and poll widgets that do integrate, which one do you prefer? So my favorite kind of qualitative tool that I've used most heavily has been Qualaroo. And if you need to spell that, it's Qualaroo. So Qualaroo has an integration here, which will dynamically integrate all that report into GA. So you can easily create an audience and then figure out which ones actually submitted the survey. So it's a super simple integration there, which is great. Difference is you usually have to pay for Qualaroo, where Google Surveys is free. So there's some feedback from Fred and James. So Crazy Egg and Hotjar heat maps are similar. Hotjar has always been great. I found that Hotjar is great because it tries to do everything for one price, but I haven't found anything that Hotjar does exceptionally. It just does an okay job at everything. So yeah, I think Crazy Egg does a much better job of actually just specifically focusing on heat maps. Just like I think Session Cam does a much better job of everything around session replays, where Hotjar does an okay job. I haven't used Lucky Orange. If anyone else here has, definitely let James know your feedback. I haven't tried that one yet. And then Wednesday's class is rescheduled. So that one's going to be on Monday now instead. If anyone's in New York City, I'll be at the Telium conference on Wednesday, which is why. So Carlos wants to know Shopify or WooCommerce. So as far as e-commerce platforms, I don't really have a preference. I haven't been on the implementation side of implementing them. I've been more on the analytics side. So from a pure analytics perspective, Shopify I think has a pretty easy and strong integration with GA. But as far as the rest of the thing, like actually helping you sell products, have a product catalog, which one looks better from a website perspective, I don't have a strong perspective. So if anyone else does, definitely let Carlos know. But they should be both fine. All right, guys, if there's any other questions, definitely let me know in the Facebook group. I think I've caught up to everyone's questions from last week from the Conversion XL conference. It was great to meet a lot of you there. I think I met between 5 to 10. So thank you guys so much for stopping by our booth. And I'll see you guys all on Monday. If you guys need anything in between, just let me know. But thank you guys so much.